Well, for me, there is no such thing as a guilty pleasure movie. I don't feel guilty in the least. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore, and you know what? I'm just gonna say it. I don't have any guilty pleasure movies. I have many types of guilty pleasure movies, or what would be described as guilty pleasure films. Except I don't feel guilty loving these films. Everything from the original Flash Gordon with Sam Jones from the '80s, to Krull, to exploitation films by Trauma, but they're all types of films that would be described as guilty pleasure. They're sometimes cheesy. They often have violence, nudity, sex, and they're often very fun, which is why I'm excited to talk to the director today of Deadly Illusions. Director and writer Anna Elizabeth James is here with us. Her film is playing on Netflix. It was #1 for a stretch. It'll probably be #1 again after everybody gets all the insights about it. But this is a fun film. Exploitation has all sorts of, there are betrayals and there's sex and sex fantasies. And you also wrote it. I mean, this came from your mind. Tell me how this project got started and what drew you to this. I could tell from the film, you knew the kind of movie you were making because I think it satisfied at every turn. It really did. It really did. So tell me what led to you writing this and getting it produced. And then I want to talk about your journey to Netflix, because that's really impressive for an indie film.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for having me, Chris. Yeah. So I went to USC Film School, and there I took all of the production classes as well as all of the writing classes. And I like to think of myself as an story structure guru. I learned all of the rules about screenwriting. I had the opportunity to make a family film out of film school, and then another one. And both those films I'm very proud of. The first one I made with Greer. That's where I met Greer. And so after you do something like that and you hit all the marks, one sits back and says, well, what is all this for, right? Those movies were so difficult and laborious to make. And I, like I said, I love them. But if I was to make another one, what would I want to say and what would I want to see? And so I just sat with myself for a little while. There was this idea that had been swimming around in my head. I call it the idea in the margins. It wasn't even on the main page. It wasn't even on the main set of goals that I was trying to do. And it just kept tinkering around in my head. And I sort of was like, that sounds most exciting. Like, that's the idea that I would want to watch. So I pitched the idea to Greer over coffee one day, and she loved it. I was so surprised by her reaction. I pitched her the whole thing. She knew it was out there, and she embraced the material, and to the point that I did feel like, okay, I better write this, because who better to play this part? I could have so much fun with Greer. So that's how the process began. And I love that you say guilty pleasure, because I think I was longing for my own guilty pleasure, and that's sort of just how it came to be.
Well, it's certainly fun, and it's also one of those things where it keeps you guessing up until the end, where I'm shocked some of the moments where I thought, like, oh my God, is this movie going to go there? And then it goes there in all the biggest ways. But also Kristen Davis from Sex and the City is in the movie. She's great. I mean, you could almost see this as like a very special episode or a check-in on her character from Sex and the City, which I did not watch on purpose ever, but I did have a girlfriend at the time that said you should watch. It's one of the, like, okay, she's going to watch football with me on Sunday. I'm going to watch some of her shows. Fine. So, but you get caught up. I mean, I did get caught up in Sex and the City. I'm not going to lie. But she's really great in this and has quite a chemistry with Greer. Like the two of them. How did you get Kristen Davis? And then it's really the cast is the thing that makes this work, because it really is the interplay between all of them.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to end up with, and you have to trust the process. And the thing that I really made paramount was I wanted to give the audience a ride, like this unique experience that we haven't had in a while. This is a psychosexual thriller. It's part of the thriller genre, right? It's a subgenre that we haven't seen lately, and it's really out there. And in order to execute at the level we did, we needed someone. I mean, I specifically wrote the part so I could get an actress who is super talented, can handle the kind of schedule that we're on. We're an indie budget, shot in 17 days. And Kristen she just hit the mark in every way. She's the only one I wanted. And we went out to her, and I know it was really far out. We mentioned the idea of going out to Dermot, which she liked. And I don't know, again, it goes back to that guilty pleasure that I want. And it just so happened, I guess, that other fans wanted it too.
Well, Dermot Mulroney is really good in this. I mean, he and then there's just a scene towards the end. I don't want to spoil it, but it's really shocking. It really goes to that place. How did you orchestrate those scenes and then tell the cast, like, look, you're going to be in these positions you never thought you'd be in? And I really don't hold anything back. I was really impressed.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I just really made a point to surround myself with people smarter than me, more talented than me, and just at the top of their game in their careers. And so, when you do that, you can execute at a high level. And what was so encouraging was everyone who read the script just said, dude, this is so far out, I'm in. And, I was able to pull in talent from areas where they work on huge blockbuster movies. And without that pedigree, we wouldn't have been able to pull it off. I'm just super in awe of how many people on my crew just love the material. And Dermot is special. I mean, out of the cast, right? He's the only male. And the first moment he arrived to set, he championed the material. He supported everything that was coming out of my brain, like religion. It was inspiring, to say the least.
Well, it's also, I mean, we can talk about the exploitation elements. I mean, there are suggested nude scenes, and I think it's all very tastefully done. But it definitely fits in the exploitation genre. But it also has some Hitchcockian elements as well. I mean, there are some twists. Clearly, you were influenced by the Hitchcock thriller.
Yeah, I set out to go to film school to make thrillers. I didn't know that I had this sort of vibe, or whatever you want to call it. So when I got into those family films, it was I had to pivot, and I knew I had to go big. And in terms of the throwbacks to those 80s, noir films, or even further back to Hitchcock, the only thing I can say is I was just honoring my truth and what I saw in my head. It wasn't that I was trying to be like someone else. So I appreciate those nods. That's wow, not that I'm even close to that. But I do think just the reaction, people who love the film, I think, if art is a form of therapy, I think in a way this sort of art has been missing from the landscape, and a lot of people have been wanting this kind of subgenre.
Yeah, well, I like that the film, I think a lot of movies feel obligated these days to have a message, have something important to say. But I think the most important job as a filmmaker, if it's not a documentary necessarily, is really you have to entertain the audience. I mean, if there are messages woven into it in the subtext, that's great. But this thing truly entertains from the standpoint. I mean, look, the proof is in Netflix, right? #1 on Netflix. And, also actually just the validation of actually getting on Netflix as a platform from an independent film. And of course, the leaf blowers are here today. I don't know if you can hear it. That's okay. That's okay. I'm going to take myself off screen in a second so you can answer. But can you talk about that journey from indie film to getting on Netflix? And what that was like in that process, just for the indie filmmakers that listen or watch the Film Threat podcast. I really want to get into the nitty gritty of you know, I see a lot of really good indie films. Not everything gets to get on Netflix, which I think is such a great broad platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So first of all, yes, number one job was to entertain, have fun. You're supposed to laugh. You're supposed to be 2 champagne glasses in when you watch. So I know some people that confuse them, and that's okay. That maybe, you know, the ones that didn't like it will come around eventually. Yeah. So in regards to if there was like any sort of message, I think, you know, Greer and I, when we initially sat down, and even with the rest of the cast, I put a letter at the beginning of the script that said my intentions for this is this reason, and that was to hopefully show that less is more, meaning female sexuality is more cerebral, and by showing less, we're actually giving more, and we could be a juxtaposition to pornography. That was sort of like my core intent, and as a filmmaker you need to have that, but that's not like the point of the film. It's just a sub you know, addition that we achieved, that I'm super proud of. No matter what anyone says, I do think we tantalized you and took you on a fun ride. I love the people who really watched it closely and went on that ride, right? In terms of getting this movie off the ground, the script was a page turner. It hit the town. It was considered a hot script, but nobody knew who I was. And the only thing on my resume were these horse movies. So I went to my connections in Hollywood and to producers that I know that I've built long relationships with. And either they all said the material wasn't for them, or they just couldn't come on board. So I had to go outside of Hollywood to find the funding. And thank goodness I did. And my partner who funded my development company, he helped me. And so this is a pure independent project made outside of Hollywood, true outlaw status, as I like to call it. We shot it for 17 days in New Mexico. We shot the opening and the ocean sequences where I'm from in Marin County. That's where I grew up. So I was very, very familiar with fog and how that works. So we shot that like in, you know, a few months after principal photography. And yeah, we stuck to our $3.5 million budget, which is insane for a movie like this. For those film geeks out there, you know what I'm talking about. And then when we finally had a picture lock, we invited, you know, sales agents from the town, and we had a few interests from some bigger companies, and then Voltage just emerged as the winner. They loved the material. They loved what you call like a picture lock, meaning it's not fully finished, but they could see the potential that I was headed towards with score and sound and whatnot. And those guys, like, just more than anyone, believed in the material. And then they're the ones that sold it to Netflix. So, or basically Netflix acquired us through a license.
Okay, so it is possible for an indie film, a scrappy indie movie, to make its way onto Netflix. That's good to know. I mean, look, I'm so glad that you mentioned being cerebral in a that way. I feel like a film like this is like a smart, sexy thriller. It's not dumbed down, and I do appreciate that you mentioned 2 champagne glasses in. I mean, for me, it was 2 Trulies. I like the hard seltzer. What can I say? But look, it's a fun ride, and it's a movie that, if you're paying attention, will give you a brainer. So
yeah,
feel free to use that quote.
Yeah, we didn't mean to give people that big of a brainer, but I'm glad we did, and I'm glad that you had fun with it. And those who get it really get it and have a ball.
That's the thing, is like, I feel like you fulfill, like, there's this, when you see the poster, it's tantalizing, and when you see the marketing materials, and the trailer, and thankfully I did not see the trailer before I saw the film, which I think actually helps with the thrill. I think too many of these trailers, they tell you the whole movie up until the third act, and then you can kind of guess what's going to happen, which is really frustrating. But this film had surprises at every turn, and thoroughly entertaining. Anna Elizabeth James, thank you for joining us on the Film Threat podcast, and thank you for delivering just truly entertaining thriller, amazing stuff. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Glad you had fun.